A delivery woman saves a child from a deadly truck, then learns who the child belongs to. The screech of tires split the air like a warning shot. Dora Tompkins didn't think. She didn't calculate. She just moved. 1 second, she was adjusting the straps of her delivery bag. Her red and white uniform already soaked through with sweat from another 12-hour shift nobody would remember. The next, her body was airborne. Legs kicking, arms reaching, the world reduced to tunnel vision and the small figure standing frozen in the middle of the street. A little girl, maybe 4 years old, dark hair, a stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest, completely unaware of the blue delivery truck barreling toward her at 40 miles per hour. Dora's shoulder slammed into the child's torso. They hit the pavement together in a tangle of limbs and dust as the truck roared past, close enough that Dora felt the heat from its engine burn against her cheek, close enough that she tasted rubber and diesel, close enough to die. But they didn't. Dora rolled onto her back, gasping, pain blooming sharp and hot across her ribs. The little girl squirmed beneath her arm, alive, crying, terrified. "You're okay," Dora breathed, her voice shaking. "You're okay, baby. You're safe." That's when the black SUVs arrived. 4 of them, sleek, silent, expensive in a way that didn't belong in this neighborhood. Men poured out, stone-faced, perfectly pressed suits, moving with military precision. No sirens, no badges, just cold efficiency and the kind of silence that made Dora's survival instincts scream run. But she couldn't run. She could barely stand. The crowd that had gathered on the sidewalk went quiet. People stepped back. Someone whispered a name Dora didn't catch. Then the circle of men parted, and he stepped through, tall, immaculate, a gray suit that probably cost more than Dora made in 6 months. His face was unreadable, carved from stone, dark eyes sweeping the scene with the kind of authority that didn't need to be announced. He looked at the little girl first, then at Dora, and when he spoke, his voice was soft, too soft. "You touched my daughter." Dora's blood went cold. Not gratitude, not relief, just a simple, terrible statement of fact. She just saved the wrong child. What happens when the person you rescue belongs to someone who doesn't believe in debts? Only consequences. The ground was still spinning when Dora tried to sit up. Her palms scraped against asphalt, tiny stones embedding themselves in her skin, but the pain felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. The little girl was crying now, really crying. Her face buried in Dora's delivery vest, while her small fists clutched the fabric like it was the only solid thing left in the world. "Sure, you're all right," Dora whispered. But her voice came out wrong, shaky, breathless. She wrapped one arm around the child, feeling the rapid flutter of her heartbeat, and something fierce woke up in Dora's chest. This tiny person was alive. That mattered more than the throbbing in her ribs or the way her vision kept blurring at the edges. The man in the gray suit hadn't moved. He stood there 5 feet away, studying them with the kind of stillness that predators have right before they strike. Behind him, his men formed a wall of black fabric and cold expressions. Nobody was calling an ambulance. Nobody was asking if they were hurt. The crowd on the sidewalk had thinned to almost nothing, people melting away like they'd suddenly remembered urgent appointments elsewhere. Dora knew that look. She'd seen it her whole life, that moment when people decided you weren't worth the trouble. But this felt different. This wasn't indifference. This was fear. "Stand up," the man said, not a request. Dora's body obeyed before her mind could catch up. She pushed herself to her feet, keeping the little girl tucked against her side, and nearly collapsed when her left ankle buckled. One of the suited men stepped forward, hand moving toward his jacket. But the man in gray raised one finger and the movement stopped. "I said stand up, not fall down." There was no anger in his voice. That somehow made it worse. Dora locked her knee, bit down on the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper, and straightened her spine. She'd been tired before today. Bone tired from years of early mornings and late nights, from carrying boxes that were always too heavy upstairs that were always too many. This was just more weight. She knew how to carry weight. "I'm standing," she said. The man's eyes narrowed, just slightly. He looked at her uniform, the company logo peeling at the edges, the name tag that read Dora in faded letters. He looked at her scuffed work boots, the fraying straps of her delivery bag still tangled around her shoulders. He was adding her up, calculating her worth, and Dora knew exactly what number he was landing on. 0. Maybe less than 0. "You moved fast," he said. "Why?" The question caught her off guard. "Why did I?" She was in the street. There was a truck. "That's not what I asked." Dora's jaw tightened. The little girl had stopped crying, but her face was still pressed against Dora's side, her small body trembling. The stuffed rabbit had fallen during the crash, lying abandoned near the curb, one of its button eyes staring up at the sky. "I don't understand what you want me to say," Dora said carefully. Every instinct she had was screaming at her to be careful, to measure her words, to remember that powerful men didn't ask questions because they wanted answers. They asked because they wanted you to confess to crimes you didn't know you'd committed. "I want you to tell me why a stranger would risk her life for someone else's child." He tilted his head, and for the first time, something like curiosity flickered across his face. "People don't do that. Not in my experience." "Then you've been meeting the wrong people." The words were out before Dora could stop them. One of the suited men tensed, his hand moving inside his jacket for real this time, but the man in gray smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps," he said softly, "or perhaps you're lying." Dora's heart kicked against her ribs. "I'm not. Everyone lies. Everyone wants something. The only question is what you think you can take from me now that you've touched what's mine." The little girl shifted against Dora's side, and Dora felt her small hand curl into the fabric of her vest again. There was something about that grip, that desperate, trusting hold, that steadied her. She'd spent her whole life invisible. People looked through her when she delivered their packages, stepped around her on sidewalks, forgot her face the moment she left their doorstep. She'd made peace with that. But this child, this scared little girl, was holding on to her like Dora mattered, like Dora was safe. "I don't want anything from you," Dora said, and she meant it down to her bones. "I just want to make sure she's okay. After that, I'll leave. You'll never see me again." "You think it works like that?" The man stepped closer, and Dora caught the scent of expensive cologne and something sharper underneath. Gun oil, maybe, or the metallic tang of old violence. "You think you can walk into my world, put your hands on my daughter, and then walk away clean? Nothing in this life is free, especially not heroism." "Daughter." The word hit Dora like a physical blow. She looked down at the little girl, really looked at her for the first time. Underneath the tear-streaked face and tangled hair, she could see the resemblance. The same dark eyes, the same stubborn set to her chin. But where the father radiated cold control, the daughter just looked small, breakable, human. "I wasn't trying to be a hero," Dora said quietly. "I was trying to stop a kid from dying. If that means something different to you, that's your problem, not mine." The silence stretched out, thin and dangerous. Somewhere in the distance, normal life continued. A dog barking, a car alarm going off, the rumble of the city that never really stopped. But here, in this circle of expensive suits and unspoken threats, time felt suspended. Dora could feel sweat trickling down her spine despite the afternoon chill. Her ankle was screaming now, and her ribs felt like someone had taken a baseball bat to them. But she didn't move, didn't flinch, because the moment she showed weakness, the moment she gave this man an opening, she knew she'd regret it. The man in gray studied her for another long moment. Then he crouched down, bringing himself eye level with his daughter, and spoke in rapid Korean. His voice changed completely, soft, gentle, the sharp edges filed away. The little girl finally lifted her face from Dora's vest and looked at her father. She said something back, her voice barely above a whisper, and pointed at the fallen stuffed rabbit. One of the suited men immediately retrieved it, brushing off the dirt before handing it to the girl. She clutched it to her chest, and Dora saw her small shoulders relax just slightly. The man touched his daughter's hair with surprising tenderness, checking her for injuries with careful hands. Then he stood and switched back to English. "Damin says you flew." His expression was unreadable. "She says you looked like a bird." Dora didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. "My men will drive you to a hospital," he continued. "They'll make sure you're treated. After that, someone will contact you. We'll discuss compensation." "I don't need." "You'll take it." The gentleness was gone, replaced by something absolute. "Because if you don't, I'll wonder why. And when I wonder about people, I learn everything about them. Where they live, where they work, who they care about, everyone they've ever known. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Dora understood perfectly. This wasn't gratitude. This was a transaction he needed to complete so he could close the books and forget she existed. Except she had the feeling that men like him never really forgot anything. "I understand," she said. "Good." He placed a hand on his daughter's back, gently guiding her away from Dora. Damin resisted for just a moment, looking up at Dora with those dark, solemn eyes. Then she whispered something that sounded like, "Thank you," in a voice almost too quiet to hear. And just like that, they were gone. The man, the girl, most of the suited men. They folded back into their black SUVs and disappeared, leaving Dora standing alone in the middle of the street with two remaining guards watching her like she might suddenly sprout wings and fly away for real. One of them gestured toward an idling car. "Hospital. Now." Dora limped toward it, each step sending fresh jolts of pain up her leg. As she slid into the back seat, she caught sight of her reflection in the tinted window. Uniform torn, face smudged with road dust, hair escaping from her bun in wild spirals. She looked exactly like what she was. A woman who'd barely survived something she didn't understand. The car pulled away from the curb, and Dora watched the empty street disappear behind them. Somewhere in this city, there was a little girl named Damin who thought Dora looked like a bird. And somewhere else, there was a man in a gray suit who thought Dora was a problem that needed solving. She closed her eyes and tried to remember what her life had looked like this morning, before everything changed. Before she learned that sometimes saving a life doesn't set you free. It just means someone powerful knows your name. The hospital smelled like bleach and old coffee. Dora sat on the examination table, her legs dangling over the edge while a tired-looking doctor wrapped her ankle with practiced efficiency. The two suited men hadn't left. They stood by the door like statues, their eyes never quite leaving her, and every nurse who passed by moved a little faster, spoke a little quieter, as if the air itself had turned dangerous. "Severe sprain, bruised ribs, minor contusions," the doctor said, not looking at her face. "You're lucky. Could have been much worse." Lucky. Dora almost laughed. She'd thrown herself in front of a truck, and now she was being babysat by men who looked like they buried bodies for a living. If this was luck, she didn't want to know what bad fortune looked like. The doctor handed her a prescription slip and left without another word. One of the suited men stepped forward and plucked it from her hand before she could read it. He photographed it with his phone, typed something quickly, then handed it back. "Prescription will be filled and delivered to your address," he said. His English was perfect, barely accented. "Cars waiting. I can take the bus." "No, you can't." It wasn't a threat. It was just a fact, delivered in the same tone someone might use to explain that water was wet. Dora slid off the table, testing her weight on the wrapped ankle. The pain was manageable now, dulled by whatever the doctor had given her. She followed the men through the hospital corridors, past the curious stares of other patients, past the reception desk where the clerk suddenly became very interested in her computer screen. The car was the same one from before. Black, expensive, windows tinted so dark they looked like sheets of obsidian. Dora climbed into the back seat and watched the city slide past. Familiar streets that somehow looked different now, like she was seeing them through a filter she couldn't quite name. The driver never spoke. The other guard sat in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing at his phone, his expression never changing. When they pulled up outside her apartment building, Dora felt something cold settle in her stomach. She hadn't told them where she lived. She'd given the hospital her information. Sure, but these men had been ready with the address before any paperwork was processed. They'd known. Maybe they'd known before the crash even happened. "Thank you for the ride," she said, reaching for the door handle. "Wait." The guard in the passenger seat turned around, and for the first time, she saw something almost human in his face. Hesitation, maybe, or concern. "You should know his name. The man from before. Su Jiangdu." Dora waited. The name meant nothing to her. "You really don't know," the guard said, and something that might have been pity flickered across his features. "That's going to make this harder for you." "Make what harder?" But the door locks clicked open, and the guard faced forward again. The conversation was over. Dora climbed out of the car and watched it glide away, silent as a shark. Her hands were shaking. She shoved them in her pockets and limped toward her building, each step sending small jolts of protest through her ankle. Her apartment was on the third floor of a walk-up that had seen better decades. The elevator had been broken for 2 years. Dora took the stairs slowly, gripping the railing, trying not to think about how much her body hurt or how strange it felt to know that men in expensive suits now knew exactly where she slept at night. Inside, her studio apartment looked exactly how she'd left it that morning. Unmade bed, empty ramen containers stacked by the sink, her spare uniform hanging on the back of the bathroom door. Normal, safe, hers. She locked the door behind her, checked it twice, then collapsed onto her bed and stared at the water-stained ceiling. Su Jiangdu. The name rolled around in her head, foreign and sharp-edged. She pulled out her phone, hesitated, then typed it into the search bar. The results loaded, and Dora's breath caught. The first article was 3 years old. Alleged crime boss walks free after mistrial. There was a photo. The same man, the same cold eyes, stepping out of a courthouse surrounded by lawyers in suits that probably cost more than her yearly rent. The second article was more recent. Businessman Su Jiangdu donates $2 million to Children's Hospital. Same man, same face, shaking hands with politicians and smiling for cameras like he was anyone's friendly neighborhood philanthropist. She kept scrolling. The deeper she went, the uglier it got. Buried under the charity work and business deals were older stories. The kind that newspapers wrote carefully, using words like alleged and rumored and suspected ties to organized crime. There were mentions of disappeared witnesses, investigations that went nowhere, prosecutors who suddenly decided to pursue other careers. And there, near the bottom of the second page, was a headline that made her stomach turn. 3 bodies found in harbor. Police suspect gang violence. The article was from 5 years ago, but one line jumped out at her. Sources close to the investigation suggest links to the Su crime family, though no arrests have been made. Dora's phone slipped from her hands onto the mattress. She sat there in the growing darkness of her apartment, listening to the familiar sounds of her building. Mrs. Chen's television through the thin wall, footsteps on the floor above, the rattle of pipes when someone flushed a toilet. Normal sounds. The sounds of people living ordinary lives where the biggest worry was making rent or whether the bodega on the corner would still be open when they got off work. She'd saved a little girl today. She'd done the right thing. But the right thing had opened a door into a world where bodies disappeared into harbors and witnesses suddenly lost their memories and powerful men smiled for cameras while running empires built on fear. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Dora stared at it for 3 long rings before she finally answered. Ms. Tompkins. The voice was male, professional, utterly devoid of warmth. This is Mr. Kong. I work for Mr. Su. He wanted me to inform you that your medical expenses have been covered in full. Additionally, a deposit has been made to your account as compensation for your time and injuries. I didn't give anyone my banking information. That won't be necessary. The transfer is complete. You should see it reflected within the hour. Dora's throat felt tight. How much? $50,000. The number hit her like a second truck. 50,000. She made 32,000 a year, before taxes. 50,000 was college debt paid off. It was a car that didn't break down every other week. It was breathing room she hadn't had since she was a child. I can't accept that, she heard herself say. There was a pause on the other end. Ms. Tompkins, Mr. Sue is not accustomed to having his generosity refused. I didn't ask for his generosity. I just helped a kid. That's not worth $50,000. Mr. Sue determines the value of his daughter's life, not you. The voice had gone colder, harder. The money is yours. What you choose to do with it is your business. But refusing it would be unwise. It would raise questions. What kind of questions? The kind that lead to answers you don't want. Accept the gift, Ms. Tompkins. Say thank you. Move on with your life. That's how this works. The line went dead. Dora sat there with the phone pressed against her ear, listening to silence, feeling the walls of her small apartment close in. She thought about her bank account, probably updating right now with more money than she'd ever seen. She thought about the man in the gray suit who'd looked at her like she was a puzzle that didn't quite fit. She thought about Demin who'd called her a bird. And she thought about the 3 bodies they'd pulled from the harbor 5 years ago. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was her banking app, confirming a deposit. $50,000. Right there in black and white, real as the ache in her ribs and the fear starting to curl in her chest like smoke. Dora opened her browser again and went back to those search results. She read every article, every blog post, every forum discussion she could find. She learned that Su Jiangdu controlled half the underground economy in the city, that he had politicians in his pocket and cops on his payroll, that people who crossed him had a habit of disappearing or suddenly deciding to move to other countries, that he'd built an empire on violence and fear, then wrapped it in charitable donations and business legitimacy until you couldn't tell where the monster ended and the man began. She learned that his first wife had died in a car accident 7 years ago, that Demin was his only child, that he protected her with the same ruthless efficiency he used to eliminate his enemies. And she learned one more thing, buried in a comment thread on a true crime forum. Someone had written, Sue doesn't forget, he doesn't forgive, and he never, ever leaves debts unpaid. If you're connected to him, even by accident, you're connected forever. That's just how it works. Dora closed her laptop and sat in the darkness of her apartment. Relief had curdled into something else. Something cold and sharp and impossible to ignore. She'd saved a child today. She'd done the right thing. But doing the right thing had tied her name to a man who made people disappear, and now she had 50,000 reasons to keep her mouth shut and pretend everything was fine. Outside her window, the city hummed and buzzed and lived. Somewhere out there, Su Jiangdu was tucking his daughter into bed. And somewhere else, people who knew his name were making sure to never, ever get in his way. Dora lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling, and wondered what it cost to save a life when the life you saved belonged to a monster's child. She was afraid she was about to find out. Dora went back to work 3 days later. Her supervisor took one look at her wrapped ankle and the fading bruises on her arms and told her to take the week off. She refused. Sitting in her apartment with $50,000 she didn't want and a phone that kept buzzing with unknown numbers felt like waiting for a guillotine blade to drop. At least on her route, she could pretend things were normal. But normal was already gone. The black sedan appeared on her second delivery. Dora was hauling a box up to a 4th-floor apartment when she spotted it through the stairwell window. Same make and model as the one that had driven her home from the hospital, parked across the street with its engine running. She finished the delivery, came back down, and the car was still there. When she moved to her next stop 6 blocks away, it followed at a careful distance, never close enough to be obvious but never far enough to miss. By lunch, Dora's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her sandwich. She sat on a bench in a small park, watching the sedan idling near the entrance, and tried to calculate what this meant. Surveillance. They were watching her, making sure she didn't do what? Talk to someone? Run? She hadn't done anything wrong. She'd taken their money because refusing it seemed more dangerous than accepting it. She'd kept her mouth shut. She'd followed the rules she didn't know existed until 3 days ago. So why were they still watching? Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but the sedan's passenger window rolled down slightly, and she saw the guard from the hospital holding a phone to his ear. He wasn't even trying to hide it. Yes. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Ms. Tompkins, this is Mr. Kong again. Mr. Su would like to extend an additional offer. I don't need anything else. Perhaps. But Mr. Su is opening a new logistics center on the east side. He's looking for experienced delivery personnel to manage operations. The salary would be triple your current wage with benefits. Full medical, dental, housing stipend. It's an opportunity most people would be grateful for. Dora watched the sedan across the park. The guard was still on the phone, still watching her. I'm grateful for my current job. Ms. Tompkins, I'm not sure you understand the nature of this offer. I understand perfectly. You want me where you can see me. You want me dependent on money that comes from him so I remember who I owe. But I don't owe him anything. I helped a kid. That's it. That's the whole story. The silence on the other end stretched so long Dora thought he'd hung up. Then Mr. Kong spoke again, and his voice had lost its professional polish. You think you're being brave. You're not. You're being foolish. Mr. Su doesn't make offers twice. Then I guess this conversation is over. She hung up. Her heart was hammering against her bruised ribs hard enough to hurt. The sedan didn't move. The guard lowered his phone, said something to the driver, and the car just sat there. A silent black promise that this wasn't finished. Dora forced herself to finish her sandwich even though it tasted like cardboard. She gathered her delivery bag, stood up despite the protests from her ankle, and went back to work. The sedan followed her for the rest of the day. That night, there was an envelope under her apartment door. Thick, cream-colored paper, her name written in precise calligraphy on the front. Inside was an invitation to a charity gala hosted by the Su Foundation. Black tie, this Saturday. A handwritten note at the bottom read, Mr. Su would be honored by your presence. Address will be provided. Dora threw it in the trash. The next morning, there were flowers outside her door. Not a small bouquet, an arrangement so large she could barely see around it. Orchids and lilies, the kind that cost more than her weekly grocery bill. The card said, with gratitude, the Su family. She left them in the hallway. By evening they were gone, and she never found out who took them. On Thursday, her supervisor called her into the office. He looked uncomfortable, shifting papers on his desk without meeting her eyes. Dora, I got a call today from a law firm representing some businessman. They said you were injured on the job and they wanted to discuss a settlement. Dora's stomach dropped. I wasn't injured on the job. I was off the clock. That's what I told them. But they were insistent. Said they wanted to make sure you were taken care of. Even offered to cover any lost wages and provide a generous severance package if you wanted to pursue other opportunities. He finally looked at her, and she saw fear in his face. Real fear. Dora, who did you piss off? I didn't piss off anyone. I just helped a kid. Well, whoever her parents are, they're making my phone ring off the hook. HR wants to know if we need to file an incident report. The company lawyer wants copies of your medical records. And I got 3 more calls from that law firm today, each one a little more aggressive than the last. He rubbed his face. Look, I like you. You're reliable. You don't complain. But I got a business to run, and I can't have this kind of heat. So if you need to take some time, or if you want to explore those other opportunities they mentioned, I'd understand. You're firing me? I'm not firing you. I'm just saying that maybe it would be easier for everyone if you took their offer. Whatever it is. Dora walked out of that office knowing she'd just lost the closest thing she had to job security. She finished her route in a blur, barely seeing the addresses, moving on autopilot. The black sedan followed her the whole time. When she got home, there was another envelope under her door. This one contained a cashier's check. $200,000. No note, no explanation. Just a piece of paper that represented more money than she'd make in 6 years of breaking her back for strangers who didn't know her name. She stared at it for a long time. Then she put on her jacket, grabbed her keys, and limped down to the street. The sedan was parked at the corner. She walked straight to it and knocked on the passenger window. It rolled down. The guard looked at her without expression. "I need to speak to him," Dora said. "Mr. Su doesn't take meetings." "Then tell him to stop. The money, the job offers, the lawyers calling my work. All of it. Tell him I don't want anything from him. I just want my life back." "You think you can negotiate with him?" "I'm not negotiating. I'm asking. There's a difference." The guard studied her for a moment. Then he pulled out his phone, typed something, and waited. When it buzzed with a response, he read it and looked back at Dora. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Someone will pick you up. I can take the bus." "No, you can't." The same words from the hospital, delivered in the same flat tone. The window rolled back up. Dora walked back to her apartment, climbed the 3 flights of stairs, and sat on her bed with the cashier's check in her hands. $200,000. Life-changing money. Money that could buy her security and comfort and all the things she'd stopped dreaming about years ago. But it came with strings she couldn't see, attached to a man who made people disappear when they became inconvenient. She thought about Damin, clutching her stuffed rabbit and calling Dora a bird. She thought about what it meant to save someone's life and have it turn into a debt you never asked for. She thought about her supervisor's face, about the way everyone she knew would slowly realize that knowing her had become dangerous. And she thought about something her grandmother used to say, back when Dora was small enough to believe the world made sense. "Baby, when somebody keeps trying to give you something you don't want, it's because they're trying to take something you don't know you have." Dora didn't know what Su Jiangdu was trying to take from her, but she was starting to suspect it was the one thing she'd managed to keep through years of poverty and exhaustion and invisibility. Her ability to look at herself in the mirror and know she'd earned everything she had, even if what she had wasn't much. She put the check in her desk drawer, unopened. Tomorrow she'd meet the man who thought money could solve problems his violence had created. Tomorrow she'd try to make him understand that some people couldn't be bought because they'd already paid for their integrity with every hard choice they'd ever made. Tomorrow she'd find out if doing the right thing was going to cost her everything she had left. But tonight she was still Dora Tompkins. Still herself. Still free. The black sedan arrived at exactly 2 p.m. Dora climbed in without a word, her stomach tight with the kind of nervousness that came from walking into situations you couldn't control. They drove through parts of the city she'd only seen from bus windows, neighborhoods where the buildings got taller and cleaner, where people walked with purpose instead of exhaustion. The car pulled up to a restaurant with no sign on the door, just a discreet bronze number plate and a doorman who nodded at the driver like they were old friends. Inside, the place was empty except for one table near the back. Su Jiangdu sat alone, reading something on his phone, a cup of tea steaming gently beside him. He looked up when she approached and gestured to the chair across from him. "Ms. Tompkins, thank you for coming. I didn't have much choice. Everyone has choices. Most people just don't like the alternatives." He set his phone down. "You wanted to talk. So talk." Dora sat, keeping her back straight despite the ache in her ribs. "I want you to stop. The money, the job offers, the men following me. I helped your daughter because she needed help. That's it. I don't want anything from you. So you've said. Multiple times." He lifted his tea, took a sip, his movements deliberate and controlled. "But you don't understand how this works. In my world, everything is a transaction. Someone does something for you, you repay the debt. You've done something I can never truly repay, which puts me in an uncomfortable position. Then consider it a gift. No debt. No transaction. There are no gifts in my world, Miss Tompkins. Only investments and liabilities. He set the cup down. You saved my daughter. That makes you important whether you want to be or not. Important people need protection. From what? He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. From the consequences of being important to me. Before Dora could respond, the restaurant door opened. 3 men walked in, moving with the casual confidence of people who owned whatever space they entered. They weren't Seuss men. Dora could tell by the way the doorman's expression changed, by the subtle shift in Seuss' posture. These men were something else. The one in front was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and expensive glasses. He walked straight to their table and spoke in rapid Korean. Sue answered in the same language, his voice level but his hand moving almost imperceptibly to straighten his jacket. The older man's gaze shifted to Dora, and she saw something cold flicker in his eyes. "This is her?" he said, switching to English. "The delivery woman?" "This is a private conversation," Sue said. "Not anymore." The man pulled out a chair and sat down uninvited. "I'm Park Min-woo, and you, Miss Tompkins, have created quite a problem." Dora's mouth went dry. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't. You just stumbled into the middle of a very delicate situation, and now everyone is wondering who you really are." Park leaned back, studying her like she was a specimen under glass. "See, when someone saves Su Jangdu's daughter, people start asking questions. Is she CIA? Is she working for the Russians? The Chinese? Is she an undercover cop trying to get close to him? I'm a delivery driver." "That's a very good cover." "It's not a cover. It's my job." Park smiled. "Then explain to me why a woman making minimum wage would refuse $250,000. Explain why she'd turn down a high-paying position. Explain why she keeps pushing away every attempt to compensate her." He leaned forward. "Because from where I'm sitting, that looks like someone running a long game. Someone who wants Sue to think she's noble and selfless so he'll trust her. So he'll bring her into his inner circle. And then what? You gather evidence? You testify? You write a book. I just want to be left alone." Nobody wants to be left alone with $250,000 sitting on their table. Park's voice hardened. "So either you're the stupidest woman I've ever met, or you're playing an angle we haven't figured out yet. Either way, you're a problem." Sue spoke then, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Min-woo, that's enough." "Is it? Because I'm not the only one asking these questions. Your enemies are asking them too. And they're starting to think that maybe this woman is important to you. Maybe important enough to use." Park stood up. "You brought attention to yourself by making such a public show of gratitude. Now everyone knows there's a woman who saved your daughter. Everyone knows you've been trying to pay her off. And everyone is wondering why she keeps refusing." He looked down at Dora, and she saw genuine menace in his face. "You've painted a target on your back, Miss Tompkins. And when someone comes for you, and they won't care whether you're innocent or not. They'll just care that hurting you will hurt him." Park walked away, his men following like shadows. The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the sudden silence. Dora's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table, trying to steady herself. "Who was that?" "Someone who thinks he's protecting me." Sue's expression was unreadable. "Unfortunately, he's not wrong. By refusing my help, you've made yourself interesting. Interesting is dangerous. So what am I supposed to do? Take your blood money and pretend I'm okay with it? You're supposed to survive. That's what everyone is supposed to do." He stood up. "My men will take you home. Don't leave your apartment tonight. I need to make some calls." "What kind of calls?" "The kind that keep you alive long enough for everyone to lose interest." He picked up his phone. "You wanted your life back, Miss Tompkins, but that life ended the moment you touched my daughter. Now you're in a new one, and the only question is whether you're smart enough to navigate it." Dora stood, her legs unsteady. I saved a child. That's all I did. I know. And that's why I'm trying to help you. Because in my world, kindness is rarer than diamonds and twice as valuable. But it's also twice as dangerous. He looked at her directly for the first time since Park had arrived. Go home. Lock your door. Wait for my call. And Ms. Tompkins? Start taking this seriously. The next person who walks through that door might not just ask questions. The ride home was silent. When Dora got to her apartment, she locked the door, checked it 3 times, and sat on her bed with her phone in her hands. Outside her window, the city hummed along like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. She'd become important to a dangerous man, which made her dangerous to everyone else. And somewhere out there, people she'd never met were deciding whether she was worth killing. Dora stayed inside for 2 days. She called in sick to work, ate canned soup, and watched the street from her window. The black sedan was always there, sometimes parked, sometimes circling the block. On the 3rd morning, she woke to silence. No engine idling below. No suited men visible anywhere. The absence felt worse than the surveillance. Her phone rang at 11 a.m. Unknown number, but she answered anyway because not answering felt more dangerous than picking up. Ms. Tompkins, this is Mr. Kong. There's been a situation. Dora's stomach clenched. What kind of situation? Demin's regular driver called in sick. Mr. Su had to use a backup service to take her to her therapy appointment. The car was intercepted 20 minutes ago. We have reason to believe it was deliberate. The room tilted. Is she okay? We don't know. The driver is one of ours now, but the route was compromised. Mr. Su is handling it, but I thought you should know. He paused. He's at the Children's Museum on 5th Street. Demin had an appointment with her therapist in the building next door. If something happens, I'm on my way. Ms. Tompkins, this isn't your problem to solve. But Dora was already grabbing her jacket, already out the door. Her ankle screamed as she took the stairs 2 at a time. She didn't have a car, didn't have money for a cab, so she ran to the bus stop and willed the number 12 to arrive faster than it ever had. When it finally came, she pushed through the crowded aisle and pressed her face against the window, watching the city blur past, thinking about a little girl who'd called her a bird. The Children's Museum was in a nice part of town, all glass and modern architecture. Dora spotted the commotion before the bus even stopped. Black SUVs surrounded the building, men in suits talking urgently into phones. Police cruisers sat at a distance, their lights off, and Dora understood immediately that whatever was happening here, the cops weren't going to help. She got off at the next stop and circled back on foot, moving through the small crowd of confused parents and curious onlookers. A man in a gray suit, not Sue, someone else, was arguing with someone through a phone, his face tight with stress. Dora caught fragments of conversation. Can't confirm location. Backup route was supposed to be secure. If they're inside already. Dora didn't think. She just moved. She'd spent 3 years doing deliveries in this neighborhood. She knew these buildings, knew the service entrances and loading docks that delivery people used because the front doors were always locked or monitored. The building next to the museum shared a basement level. She'd dropped off packages there before. She slipped around the side, found the service entrance, and tried the door. Locked. But the window next to it was cracked open, probably by a smoker who didn't want to keep propping the door. Dora pushed it wider, squeezed through despite her ribs protesting, and dropped into a hallway that smelled like cleaning supplies and old concrete. The basement was a maze of storage rooms and mechanical spaces. Dora moved quickly, following the distant sound of voices, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. When she heard a child crying, she started running. The therapy office was on the 2nd floor. Dora took the back stairs, the ones marked staff only, and emerged into a carpeted hallway lined with doors labeled with doctors' names. The crying was louder here, coming from behind a door at the end of the hall. 2 men stood outside it, and they definitely weren't therapists. One of them was on his phone. The other was watching the main elevator, his hand inside his jacket. Dora's mind raced. She couldn't fight them. She wasn't armed. She was just a delivery woman with a bad ankle and bruised ribs who'd somehow ended up in the middle of something that should have required SWAT teams. But Damin was behind that door, and these men weren't here to help her. So Dora did the only thing she could think of. She pulled the fire alarm. The building erupted in noise. Sirens wailed, lights flashed, and the two men spun around in confusion. Dora charged forward, not at them but past them, throwing her full weight against the therapy room door. It burst open and she stumbled inside to find Damin huddled under a desk. Her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest, tears streaming down her face. A woman in professional clothes, the therapist probably, stood frozen by the window, her phone in her shaking hands. "Get away from her!" Dora shouted at the therapist, though she had no idea if the woman was complicit or just terrified. She dropped to her knees beside the desk and reached for Damin. "Hey, remember me? We're going to fly again. Okay?" Damin's eyes went wide with recognition. She scrambled out from under the desk and threw her arms around Dora's neck so hard it knocked the breath from her lungs. Dora stood, lifting the child despite the fire in her ribs, and turned to face the door just as the two men burst through. They stopped when they saw her. One of them raised his gun, and Dora's entire world narrowed to that small black barrel pointed at her chest. She turned her body, putting herself between the weapon and Damin, and felt the little girl's face press against her shoulder. "Put her down," the man with the gun said. His English was accented, his voice cold. "Put her down and walk away. This doesn't concern you." "Everything about her concerns me," Dora said, and was surprised to find she meant it. The fire alarm kept wailing. Somewhere below, she could hear shouting, the thunder of feet on stairs. The man's finger moved to the trigger, and Dora knew with absolute clarity that she was about to die in a therapist's office holding a little girl who thought she could fly. Then the window exploded. Su Jiangdu came through it like something out of a nightmare, glass showering around him, two of his men right behind him. The room erupted in violence so fast Dora barely processed it. Bodies moving, the crack of breaking bone, someone's gun skittering across the floor. Dora turned away, pressing Damin's face into her shoulder, murmuring things that didn't matter. "It's okay, you're safe, I've got you." While behind her the sounds of fighting filled the small room. When silence finally fell, Dora turned around. Su stood in the center of the room, breathing hard, his expensive suit torn and bloodied. The two men were on the floor, unconscious or dead. Dora didn't let herself look closely enough to tell. His eyes found hers, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something other than cold calculation in his face. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "Neither should they." Dora's voice shook. "But here we all are." Damin lifted her head from Dora's shoulder and said something in Korean, her small voice cutting through the tension. Su's expression cracked, just for a moment, and he crossed the room in 3 strides. But he didn't take his daughter from Dora's arms. He just put his hand on Damin's back and spoke softly to her, his words gentle in a way that didn't match the violence still lingering in the air. Outside, sirens were getting closer. Real sirens this time, not just the fire alarm. Su looked at Dora. "We need to leave. Now. The fire department will be handled. Come with me or stay and answer questions you don't want to answer. Your choice." It wasn't really a choice. It never had been. They left through the same service entrance Dora had used to enter. Su's men had already cleared the route, moving with the kind of precision that came from practice. Dora carried Damin, who refused to let go of her neck, while Su walked beside them, speaking rapid Korean into his phone. The black SUVs were waiting in an alley 2 blocks away, engines running, doors open. Dora climbed into the back seat and finally, gently, tried to set Damin down beside her. The little girl's grip tightened, her face pressing harder into Dora's shoulder. Su said something soft in Korean, But Damin shook her head, her small hands fisting in Dora's jacket. So Dora kept holding her, feeling the rapid flutter of her heartbeat gradually slow as the SUV pulled away from the chaos they'd left behind. They drove to a house Dora had only seen in news articles. It sat behind tall walls and electronic gates in a neighborhood where houses had names instead of numbers. The security was invisible but everywhere. Cameras, sensors, men in suits positioned at careful intervals. Inside, the house was surprisingly warm. Not cold and sterile like she'd expected, but full of color and light. Children's drawings covered one wall of the foyer. A toy kitchen sat in the corner of what should have been a formal living room. Sue led them upstairs to a bedroom that was unmistakably Damin's. Stuffed animals lined the shelves. Books in both Korean and English filled a small bookcase, and a nightlight shaped like a moon cast a soft glow across everything. Damin finally loosened her grip enough for Dora to set her down on the bed. A woman appeared in the doorway, older, kind-faced, speaking gentle Korean. The nanny Dora guessed. Damin looked at Dora one more time, her dark eyes serious and searching, before she let the nanny lead her toward the bathroom. Sue gestured for Dora to follow him downstairs. They ended up in a study lined with books that actually looked red, their spines creased and worn. He poured 2 glasses of something amber from a crystal decanter and handed one to Dora. She took it but didn't drink. "How did you know where to find her?" he asked. "Mr. Kong called me. He told me about the intercepted car." Something flickered across Sue's face. "He wasn't supposed to do that." "Then I'm glad he disobeyed you." Dora set the glass down on his desk. "What happened back there? Who were those men? Competitors. People who think hurting my daughter will give them leverage." He took a drink, his expression hardening. "They were wrong. They almost weren't." Dora's hands were still shaking. She pressed them against her thighs to steady them. "If I hadn't been there, but you were." Again. Sue studied her over the rim of his glass. "Why? You could have ignored Kang's call. You could have stayed home where it was safe. Instead, you ran toward danger. Again. For a child who isn't yours. For a man who's done nothing but make your life harder." "She's 4 years old. She was scared. That's all the reason I needed." "That's not how most people think." "Then most people are doing it wrong." Dora met his eyes. "Look, I know you think everyone has an angle, that everyone wants something, but I grew up with nothing. I've been invisible my whole life. I learned a long time ago that the only thing I own that nobody can take from me is the choice to do right by people when they need it. Your daughter needed help. Twice now. So I helped. That's it. That's the whole story." Sue was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked to the window, looking out at the manicured gardens behind his fortress of a home. "When my wife died, I made a promise that I would protect Damin from everything. From my enemies, from my world, from the consequences of who I am. But today I realized something. I can't protect her from everything. Today, the person who saved her wasn't one of my highly trained guards or my carefully vetted security team. It was a delivery woman with a bad ankle who should have been at home staying out of trouble." He turned back to face her. "I've spent the last 2 weeks trying to figure out what you want from me. I've had people investigate your entire life. I know you grew up in foster care. I know you put yourself through community college while working 2 jobs. I know you send money to a woman named Ruth Chen every month even though you can barely afford it because she was kind to you when you first moved into your building. I know everything about you, Ms. Tompkins. And the only thing I don't know is what it would take to buy you." "You can't," Dora said simply, "because I'm not for sale. Everyone is for sale." "No, everyone has a price. There's a difference. A price is what you'll take to go away, to be quiet, to pretend something didn't happen. But what I have isn't for sale because giving it away would mean I'm not me anymore. And I've spent too many years fighting to be myself to trade that for money I didn't earn." Sue stared at her. Then, slowly, something in his face shifted. Not softening exactly, but changing. like he was seeing her for the first time instead of seeing a problem he needed to solve. My world doesn't have room for people like you. I know. That's why I don't want to be in it. But you are. The moment you saved Damin the first time, you became part of this whether you wanted it or not. He set his glass down. Park Min-woo was right about one thing. You have enemies now. People who will try to use you to get to me. People who think hurting you will hurt her because she's attached to you. And she is attached. She hasn't spoken to anyone since her mother died except her therapist. But tonight, in the car, she asked me if the bird lady was going to come back. Dora's throat tightened. What did you tell her? I told her I didn't know. Because I don't. He moved closer, and for the first time since she'd met him, Su Jiangdu looked uncertain. I can't force you to accept my protection. I can't make you take money you don't want or a job you didn't ask for. But I can tell you this. My daughter feels safe with you. And in my world, safety is the rarest thing there is. So I'm asking, not as someone who's trying to buy you or control you, but as a father, will you let me keep you safe so you can keep being the person my daughter thinks you are? Dora thought about her small apartment, her delivery route, her normal life that had evaporated the moment she'd thrown herself in front of a truck. She thought about Damin's small arms around her neck and the way the little girl had called her a bird like it was the most natural thing in the world. She thought about what her grandmother had said about gifts and debts and the things people tried to take from you. I'll accept protection, she said finally, but not money, not jobs, not control over my life. You can keep me safe, but you can't keep me. That's the deal. Take it or leave it. And if I leave it, then I'll figure it out on my own, like I always have. Sue smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most stubborn. Can't I be both? He laughed, a sound so unexpected that Dora almost didn't recognize it. My men will maintain a security presence around your building. Not surveillance, protection. You won't see them unless you need them. You'll also have a direct line to my head of security. If anything feels wrong, you call. No questions asked. And my job. I'll make sure your supervisor understands that any problems related to your situation are handled. You can keep working. Keep your life. Keep being invisible to everyone except the people who matter. He extended his hand. Do we have an agreement? Dora looked at his hand for a long moment. Then she shook it. We have an agreement. They stood there in his study, two people from completely different worlds who'd somehow found common ground in a 4-year-old girl who thought kindness looked like birds. Footsteps on the stairs made them both turn. Damin appeared in the doorway, dressed in pajamas covered in stars, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. She looked at Dora, and then she did something that stopped Dora's heart. She smiled. It was small and hesitant, but it was real. Then she crossed the room, took Dora's hand in her tiny one, and said in careful English, "Thank you, bird lady." Dora crouched down so they were eye level. You can call me Dora. Dora, Damin repeated, testing the name. Then she leaned forward and hugged Dora again, quick and fierce, before running back to her nanny who was waiting patiently in the hallway. When Dora stood up, her eyes were wet. Sue was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. She spoke to you, he said softly. She never speaks to anyone. Maybe she just needed the right person to listen. Maybe. He walked her to the door where one of his men was waiting to drive her home. Miss Tompkins, Dora, thank you. Not for saving my daughter, because I can never really thank you enough for that, but for teaching me that some people can't be bought because they already know their own worth. Dora stepped out into the night air, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. The SUV that drove her home was the same black sedan that had been following her, but this time it felt different. Not like a cage, more like a shield. When she got back to her apartment, she lay on her bed and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow she'd go back to work. Tomorrow she'd deliver packages to people who wouldn't remember her face. Tomorrow she'd be invisible again to everyone except the small circle of people who mattered. But tonight, She was Dora Tompkins, the woman who'd saved a little girl twice and refused to let that sacrifice define her worth. She'd walked into a mafia boss's world and walked back out on her own terms. She'd faced down guns and threats and money and power, and she'd come through it still herself. Still free, still whole. And in a city full of people who'd forgotten how to be brave without expecting something in return, that was winning big enough.